Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and we're lucky to be joined again today by Assemblymember Greg Wallis from AD 47. Welcome back to the show, Greg.
Thanks for having me back. Third time's the charm. Maybe we'll get it right this time.
Yes, exactly. No, man, it's been fun. I feel like there was a few weeks there where we were doing some outside guests, so we were talking about more issue-specific stuff. So we had one on insurance and one on like broadband and some other stuff. So it's cool to get back to just kind of bantering.
I love it. I'm looking forward to it.
So welcome back to the podcast. You represent the district. Well, you can tell us a little bit about your district, but I think you already have. But where Coachella is, right?
47th Assembly District. Technically, the festival is just right outside my district, but you fly into my district, you stay in my district, you eat and drink in my district, and then you go into the festival.
All right. Very cool. So how was that? You went recently, right?
So I don't do Coachella. I do Stagecoach.
Oh, Stagecoach
so
is what you do.
2 weekends at Coachella, third week of Stagecoach. I usually go to Stagecoach. I've only been to Coachella once, but this year I decided I might be a little too old for it, a little too tired. And so what we do is we'll do Couchchella and we'll do Stagecoach. And so what you do is you can stream it on Amazon, right? So if you have Amazon Prime, you can go in and watch the acts. And you can sit there from the comfort of your home and enjoy. So we went to one night of Stagecoach. It was awesome. We went Friday night, and then my wife and I decided to stream it at Amazon at home.
Wait, so can anyone stream it?
Anyone with an Amazon membership, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, man, that's crazy. I didn't even know this.
I know. I should have told you. I'm sorry. That's on
pretty
my bad.
Awesome. No, I mean, hey, I'll take a look at the lineup. When's Coachella? I don't even know.
So it's April, right? So second week of April, third week of April.
Yeah. Okay, nice, man. That's cool. Yeah, no, I saw you at that, I guess it was Stagecoach. See, I've never been to any of these cool festivals.
I do the country music thing,
Northern California, so.
We have
some fun music stuff up here, too, but nothing like, as, I don't know, like well-known, right? So this week, and we're not going to talk a ton about this, but the infamous appropriation suspense file hearing is coming up. Basically, for the listeners that don't know, it's if your bill has any fiscal impact of any kind, your bill goes to the Appropriations Committee, generally gets put on the suspense file if it costs over a certain amount, and you kind of, I guess, plead with the chair of the committee to let your bills out, and then you wait for the fateful day when you're going to hear if they get out or not. So do you have any bills sitting in appropriations this week?
That's how it works. Yeah, you're right. I have a lot of bills in appropriations this week, but one of the ones that I think is really cool, they're all really cool, but one of the ones that I really like, and it already got amended in Rev and Tax, but basically it allowed for a full deduction of interest on student loans from your taxes, above the line deduction. We had it amended in Rev and Tax to basically increase the student loan interest from $2,500 to $5,000. So we're effectively doubling the amount. Idea behind it is just, so many students are coming out of school with these just massive amounts of debt, and I don't think that we necessarily need to be just wiping that debt clean, but we do need to be helping people. And so if they're going to sit there and use their degree to go work in California, like, we should be encouraging that. So writing off on taxes.
That's a great idea. I mean, I think it really is, I think, a much better solution than, just full forgiveness necessarily. I mean, there are some great forgiveness programs on the, when you pay it off for a certain amount of time and in a certain field and all these things. But, I think in general, like, this is a great way to help kind of alleviate some of those costs. We're hopeful, man. More about just reducing the cost of higher education in general.
Absolutely. I mean, crazy. I think when my dad was going to UC Irvine, he was telling me that he used to be able to paint houses all summer and he could pay for school for the next year. And there's just no way you could do that today.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, even the community college is still a great deal.
Great option.
If you go for 2 years, right? 2 years free in California. But then after that, I mean, even a state school, a CSU even is pretty costly, right? So I'm certainly more affordable than your privates or even your UCs. But we definitely need to do more to try to bring those costs down. I think just so much of our university system has just gone so heavy on administration and it's just, I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So
And I know that's an area you're passionate about. Appreciate your work on that. So always happy to work with you in that regard. Another one I have for you that I think you actually would like because you
Yeah.
are an electric vehicle owner, correct?
You're calling me out?
I'm
Yeah?
calling you out on your own podcast. Yeah. So this is AB 2678. It just extends the sunset on the law that permits ZEVs to travel in HOV lanes for 15 months. So if the feds are going to extend it, we want the state to extend it as well. It's a great incentive to get more people into these vehicles. And so we're hopeful that one moves too.
Well, and I feel like, even if maybe you're not a big fan of EVs, I still think this is a good bill because I think the more people we can get into the carpool lane, the better, right? Because it's like, it alleviates traffic. I mean, I just feel like so few people use that lane for actual carpooling. And we need to incentivize its use, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And spread that traffic out.
Spread it out a little bit. Right? Nobody likes traffic.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we've got a project in my district that they're actually trying to extend the Diamond Lane all the way from my district essentially all the way to the Capitol. And it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean I think that bill makes sense. So let's do it.
And last one I highlight for you here, I'm going to talk about on the floor a little bit today. Because it's Food Allergy Awareness Month. So this bill was brought to us by a young student named Zachy, and basically it allows schools to use an alternative to an EpiPen once the FDA approves it.
Oh wow! Okay.
I don't even know why it's on. I don't understand how that's going through APROPS. I don't know that there's a cost to it, but I think that they don't know maybe is why they do it.
So hopefully that one gets
But basically, so you don't have to get stabbed by a needle. If you can do a nasal delivery or something like that, we want to, and the FDA approves it, of course. We want that to count instead of having to poke kids. So
that's great.
Yeah.
No, that's really awesome.
But we'll talk more about that today on the floor. I'll let you wait in suspense.
All right.
See what I did there?
I do see what you did there. I think it's Joe Patterson, our colleague Joe Patterson, that tweeted one time about. I think it's something along the lines of if your bill goes on suspense, there is no suspense. It just means your bill is dead. And so we'll see what happens this week. I don't know. I've got about 8 bills on suspense as well. And, the big one, my big priority bill is basically the bill to create more transparency in tracking our homelessness dollars. So that's at the top of my list. And I've talked to the chair about it. And, it's just kind of frustrating, right? Because we've given billions of dollars to these homelessness programs. And so I brought up the other day, hey, will you guys support, just increasing, basically reporting where you're sending this money? And they're like, yeah, we can totally do that. We just need more money. And so it's all right, well, there's got to be a better way here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I hope that one continues to move. I think it makes sense to let as many off right now as possible, right? I mean, if you're the chair of APROPS, why are you going to sit here and hold these bills? You want to let them through. And, I mean, maybe you're using them later on as negotiating chips. But
sure,
I mean, if it's not in the final budget, it's not happening anyway, right?
That's true.
So why say no now?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's my prediction.
All right,
we'll see what happens.
Hopefully that resonated when you made that argument with the chair.
Yeah, right? I'm just saying I'm optimistic.
All right, that's good. That's good. So last question before we dive into our stuff this week. Are you watching the show Fallout?
I am not. I actually exclusively watch Golf Channel and the Weather Channel. And I'm excited for the PGA Championship this week. But tell me about Fallout. It was a video game, right?
It was a video game, and now it's a show. And it's one of the weirder shows on television, probably. It's on, actually, I think it's on Amazon Prime as well. But it's good stuff. I'll just say it's good stuff. If you like that sort of thing, you like it. And if you're someone like my wife who's like, why the heck are you watching this? Maybe you won't like it.
Well, I'll have to check it out.
It's pretty weird, but it's great. I just finished it up. But PGA, I don't watch a lot of golf, but I might need to start doing that because I'm getting more into golf this year.
I know you were showing me you're working on your swing. It's looking good.
Working on the swing a lot, but I haven't. And I'm watching little golf clips on social media sometimes, but I haven't really sat down and watched golf.
It's kind of more really used as background noise. You can get some stuff done around the house and still check in and see what's happening.
No, I like that. I mean, that's kind of how I treat baseball, to be honest with you. I turn the games on all the time, and I don't necessarily just like a football game. You sit there and you watch a football game.
Yeah.
But like if it's a baseball game, I'm like, I just want to know what's going on, you know. And
Although
then
that with the pitch clock, there, it's getting quicker.
it is. Oh, I can't tell you how many times this year I've looked at the time and I'm like, oh, I got to turn the game on, and I go on, it's over.
It's over.
I'm
Yeah.
like, what is happening? So yeah, which I think is probably good in some ways, and but it's just different. It's an
Yeah, it's
adjustment.
different. A little bit of an adjustment. I think the Dodgers got a game done in under 2 hours
Are you
last week. I
serious?
think it was like hour 55. Just
That's
insane.
crazy.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So I mean, I've always try to remember to flip the games on, and then if the bases get loaded or something, I'll sit down and watch that part.
That's the way to do it.
So good stuff, man. Well, hey, let's dive into our question of the week. So we've been polling listeners every week on some things. This week's question, by the way, you can go to our Twitter X page at Point of Order Pod if you want to participate. This week's question is, do you have an issue with lawmakers killing bills by abstaining from the vote rather than voting yes or no? So this comes off of this CalMatter story this week, where basically they did an analysis of a bunch of bills that have basically died because the majority of the committee just doesn't vote. This happened most recently and notably, I guess, on Vince Fong's NDA bill, where there was like one no vote and everyone,
Yeah.
a couple yes votes, but then a bunch of people abstained. So look, this is a sensitive topic because I actually think there are some legitimate instances where an abstention is warranted.
Absolutely. No, I've done it, right? I mean, you're sitting there and you're saying, hey, I love the intent of this bill, but this thing's not fully baked right now. I don't want to support it in its current form, but I don't want to vote no against it because I like where you're trying to.
I like where you're headed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to kill a bill that way, I mean, come on, that's just
Pretty rough.
disingenuous, right? I mean,
I actually, and that's why I think there's a distinguishing there between like a legitimate, like, hey, your bill's not really ready for prime time, I'm going to lay off of it for now. And like, this bill needs to die, so I'm just going to not vote on it.
Right. I mean, and I get it. Some of these are tough votes. They're tough decisions. But I think in that article that you're referencing, even former Assemblymember Mike Gatto brought up the point that, we're sent up here by our constituents to make these tough votes and make these tough decisions. And so our constituents deserve a yes or a no. And it's, I don't think it's a great look to be killing bills by just abstaining from it. I mean, I think last year in public safety, we had some bills that weren't able to move through with 0 no votes.
Yep.
I mean, how does that happen?
That's terrible. So one of those was mine. I had a bill, district bill.
Sorry, was that a sensitive subject?
Yeah, you really triggered me there, honestly. No, but I had a bill in public safety last year, and it was a father in my district had lost their daughter, and it was a bill to basically try to prevent her killer got sentenced to 10 years in prison, got out in less than 3, got out in about 2.5 years. After being, sentenced, right, for a much longer term. And so due to some early release policies that we were trying to make some really narrow adjustments to, and it was so narrow that the chair wouldn't even vote no on it, right? Like, I mean, and he doesn't have a problem voting no on stuff,
right?
That the previous chair. And so it was really a bummer to see, like, the bill die because everyone just said, I'm just going to lay off this. Because it's nobody wanted to vote against it, but it's just frustrating. I don't think it's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the public deserves to see where their representatives are on these issues, and again, I mean, to your earlier point, it makes sense to abstain from time to time if it's not fully cooked.
Yeah,
but man, to kill bills that way, it's just something that does need to change. And looking forward to having those conversations. I'm glad there's been some light shed on that too.
Yeah, it was a good reporting. CalMatters has been actually talking about this quite a bit, it's funny you mentioned former Assemblymember Mike Gatto, because he was actually famous for, I want to say he never abstained in his entire legislative career. I think he was in the assembly for like 6 years. But I'll have to check with him on that. But it was like notorious that he would always vote yes or no. Like, he just had a policy against abstentions, like almost like hardcore.
I had a senator tell me that the other day. He said, my constituents didn't send me up here to hide under my desk. I'm going to tell you how where I'm at.
Yeah, that's fair. So I actually put the wrong link in here. We'll get it fixed in the show notes. But there was an earlier story that CalMatters had done on this very topic that basically it kind of went beyond the abstentions, and it broke down how much the majority party or some of the members in the majority party vote no, and it's like never. Which I found really, it was like I think one assembly member had like in 600, I can't remember, like 6 years or something, has not cast a no vote or
Zero
something
no
like
votes.
that.
Zero no
Like
votes.
their entire time.
There's got to be something you don't like.
Which is so funny. It's so foreign to me because I vote no on stuff all the time. I mean, not all the time, but you know what I mean. Like I don't have like a hesitation to vote no if it's something that I don't think is a good policy, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've seen you vote no quite a bit as well on things that are just like big issues that are, if they're bad policies, they're worthy of a no vote.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
but it's just funny to think about, that dynamic. So
No, it really is fascinating. It's one of the things that, I've heard from time to time when people say, well, you're up there and you're in the super minority. What sort of power are you going to have? What ability are you going to have to influence these policy conversations? The reality is, because we have such a super majority minority dynamic here, we've got the freedom to vote our district. We get to actually go represent our constituents. Where if you're in the supermajority party, I mean, we had a member who got punished for voting no in special session last year. Got removed, stripped of her committee assignments because she voted no against the speaker and the governor on it. And I think there's something to us being able to go up there and say, hey, we got the freedom to go out there and fight for what our constituents sent us up here to fight for. And so
it's so true, man. Yeah. I mean, I will say there is a level of freedom to it that is really, really cool. Because I think we're expected to vote no on things. Like people aren't surprised when we're like, yeah, we don't like that, we're gonna vote no. Like we're not trying to be jerks. It's just like, hey, that's not good policy, right?
Yeah, well, we've been trying this for 2-3 decades now, and things continue. I mean, with your homelessness comments last week, and what was that, budget sub 7, when you talked about how what do we spent $24 billion, and we've only seen homelessness increase.
Yeah,
I mean,
something's wrong. So yeah, that's why we're here. We got to fight for some changes. But I just, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the idea of never casting a no vote. But then on the other side of it, you also have to read that article and go, if you're the majority party, you're usually only allowing bills to move forward that you're going to support. So it's really kind of stacked anyway.
Yeah,
right?
That's
like,
true.
I mean, I think, if you're the speaker or a pro tem or whatever, like, you don't really want a bill on your floor probably where you're not going to want to vote for it. So it's just, it's a little bit different the way the process works like that for them too, I guess. So,
but did that article, was it referring to just floor votes or committee votes?
I think it was referring to all votes. Yeah.
You got to think there's something in a committee.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
That you'd be like, I just don't like, because there's things like with Republicans, right? Where we don't all think the same, right?
No,
we don't all
absolutely
have
not
the same opinion on everything. So it's like, you'd think you'd come across some policy at some point where you're like, I feel differently than you about that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's where the abstentions come in.
Well, I think one of our colleagues called that a nice no, right?
Yeah,
like
a nice
I saw
no.
that in calendar. So
yeah, that's
maybe
right.
Maybe that's the approach there.
You're just nicely voting no. No, that's true. All right, so let's jump into our stories of the week. So a few things to talk about this week. I think off the top, there's a big ballot measure pending right now at the Supreme Court. It's the Taxpayer Protection Act that would essentially change pretty substantially or reinforce substantially at the local level the types of taxes that you could raise and what thresholds would be required to do that, whether it be majority or 2/3. And so this is currently pending before the California Supreme Court, and the governor is really encouraging them to basically not allow it to go to the ballot this November. I don't know if you've been following the story at all, but
it's hard not to follow it.
It's a pretty interesting one. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts.
I mean, it's an interesting approach, to try and circumvent the will of the people and go through the court system this way. If there are constitutional concerns, I mean, obviously going to trust the ruling of the court on this, but it seems to me that This is something that we should be asking Californians. We can, use
Yeah.
direct democracy as a good tool here. And if there's some certain provisions in it, I mean, I know, when you get into these legal arguments here, they talk about being overly broad on ballot initiatives.
Yeah.
I mean, those things can be determined after
Right.
we've asked the people. And if Californians decide, hey, we want to make this change, we don't really like that you guys can continue to increase our taxes the way you're doing it, we'd like to see a different approach.
Yeah.
I don't know why we don't bring that to, I mean, obviously I think that's a good question to ask.
Yeah.
It's appropriate. And then you can hammer out the details through the judiciary after we've asked the voters, really.
No, and I think that's the right approach. It's interesting because the side that's trying to get the initiative taken off the ballot is really kind of arguing that, right? That like, well, the voters really aren't properly positioned to make these calls. And it's like, well, but we have before, right? Like we had Proposition 13. We've done things like this over the years, and this is kind of the unique nature of California, right? Is the direct democracy aspect of it. It's probably unlike many states from the standpoint of our initiative process is very unique, but at the same time, it's also one of the only tools that voters have if they do disagree with something going on in the state, right? Where they can actually go direct, and make their voices heard.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
it seems problematic and I think the Supreme Court, by the way, commented on this as well, but I think they sound hesitant to want to take it away from the voters.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great for democracy to try and be able to use the judiciary every time you don't like something that's happening, right? We've got a democratic process. We can work through the legislature, or in certain cases, we can go directly to the people.
Yeah.
Seems like the right way to do it. Democracy dies in darkness, like they say. We want to shine some light on the process, and we want to ask Californians to make a decision from time to time on these things. So,
yeah, no, I think I'm hopeful that this kind of turns out where they are hesitant to do that, and the voters are allowed to make their voices heard on it. I mean, honestly, both sides still have an opportunity to make their case.
That's
Right?
absolutely the point, right?
To the voters. So
this
it's not,
thing isn't determined yet.
Exactly.
Make your case to the people of California and let them make a decision.
Exactly. So on that topic, though, there was this great story in Politico about the initiative deadline, right? So the title is "This Month is Make It or Break It for California Ballot Measures," really talking about, I think we have until June 27th. So a few years ago, there was a change where proponents of an initiative can negotiate with the legislature up until, I think, 132 days before the election to either pull something off of, the ballot, essentially, in exchange for some sort of legislative deal.
Yep.
And that deadline is swiftly approaching. And so, and we'll put the article in the show notes, but basically, Taxpayer Protection Act, that's more of a different issue because it's pending in the Supreme Court. But then you have an initiative to reform PAGA, the Private Attorneys General's Act, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that are creating problems for small businesses, and costly litigation for small businesses that has to be fixed. And then you also have Proposition 47, famously an initiative to reform that. Has not qualified yet, but is probably within 3 to 4 weeks of knowing whether or not that qualifies for the ballot, and whether or not, the legislature is going to take any action, at least enough action, let's say. I think they will take some action on retail theft, and whether or not the proponents are going to continue pushing that forward. So, what are your thoughts on the landscape of that? And I kind of hope all these go to the voters, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because, all right, so you're going to go through the process to collect the requisite number of signatures, and once you do and you qualify,
which is a lot,
and it's costly, right? I mean, this is, and running an effective campaign statewide in California is cost prohibitive.
Yeah,
so if you can use this as a tool to be able to go to the legislature and say, look, clearly the people want to see action taken here.
Right.
We'd rather not spend the tens of millions of dollars in order to have a fight over it. And sometimes, governing through initiative is too broad, right? The legislature is more equipped to get in there with a fine-tooth comb and say, okay, what changes can we actually make that are substantive enough to get at your sort of broader goals here? and can we come up to? So it'll be interesting to see how
Yeah.
it plays out. That was a fascinating article when they start looking at all the dynamics of,
Yeah.
if a deal's met here, are the proponents going to go over there and
Nope.
shift funding and whatnot? But yeah, no, I'm kind of with you. I would like to see these things go to the voters, but if if there's some significant action that the
Yeah.
legislature can take, we obviously would love to do that as well.
I'd be totally fine with that. I think my question is like, is the legislature willing, right? And I think that's where I struggle, because some of these big initiative fights and the big initiative pushes are because the legislature's been unwilling to change it, right? But to your point about it being too broad, like this is kind of the problem we've had with Prop 47 in the first place, is that the legislature can't really go in and fix it enough, right? Where they almost need it to go to the people.
Yeah,
to
I think on
change
Prop
it,
47
right?
exactly.
Like,
I mean, our hands are kind of
so-
tied, right?
yeah, which makes it tough. And so from that standpoint, it'll probably be good to have the voters vote on it. I do think on the PAGA issue, the legislature could fix that. I think it's more of a political will issue, right? So, but maybe
Back to our earlier conversation about abstentions.
yeah, exactly, right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you. I think when I meet with the small businesses in my district, I think they bring up PAGA more than anything else. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's just so many of our small businesses across the board, no matter what business you are in. I have met so many business owners that have just said, I got hit with this lawsuit. And in some cases, like, they don't even want it resolved. They just want the settlement. They want the lawyers want the money. And it's just like, it's just not good for our business environment in California.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, I just had a conversation with the restaurant owner last week in my district about this, and they were thankful that it only cost them $250,000-$300,000 to settle
It's
this
crazy.
claim. And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a nightmare for business owners. And and back to affordability is the number one issue in California, in my opinion. And when business owners are having to factor this in, like, that cost is just going to continue to get passed on.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
And it's just going to make life harder on all Californians. So absolutely need to take some action there. If that goes through initiative or through the legislature, again, happy to do that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So clock is ticking on that. I'm sure we'll be hearing more on those stories in the next few weeks. Were you around for this? So the next one here in our notes is the gas price hearing, or the price gouging hearing. Were you part of that one? I can't remember.
So from last year, the original
No,
one?
I think like a couple weeks ago they did a hearing on the gas price gouging.
I think that was the one in the Senate. I think
So,
the
it
Senate
was
held
in the
that.
Senate.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I remember because we were talking with this Arizona legislator
Yeah.
at our caucus lunch.
Came
the
up
other
to
day that
testify.
Came up to testify
Yeah.
on that, because like I guess it's hurting Arizona too or something.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is pretty weird.
No, I mean,
But I bring it up because our gas prices are ridiculous. I think that's why I bring it up. To your
Well-
point about affordability.
well, and this is one of the things that this administration seems to be overly fond of doing. We take some minuscule action, we send out a press release saying the problem's solved, and then we're back in the same situation a few months later. And so when we had that special session last year,
Yeah.
right, when going after price gouging and going after refineries claiming that they're manipulating the market to harm California. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense that these companies would be downright altruistic in 48 states where you're seeing prices go down, and just going after, I think it's California and Illinois that are seeing, these price spikes. It's absolutely a failure of public policy in Sacramento. And to your point about an Arizona legislator coming to testify in opposition or testify on that bill, it's starting to impact our neighbors too.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, Californians are getting squeezed here, and we know the solution, right? This is basic economics, right? It's a supply and demand issue here. And when a refinery goes offline, when there becomes some sort of raw crude shipping issue, when there's any sort of delay in the process, we've got all of our refineries operating at maximum capacity right now.
Yeah.
Demand doesn't drop. So you have a lack of supply, and all of a sudden you see price spikes. That's the problem here. We don't refine enough of it. We have our own blend here in California. It's not like there's a pipeline where we can bring this in off of. But that's been the policy set from the state legislature for the last 2 decades. So it's not like we didn't see this coming.
For sure. And just set a little context for this, because I know we kind of just jumped into it, but it's, last year, I think you brought it up, but the legislature passed legislation on price gouging, which, I think is a distraction from the real issue, right? And this hearing this last week actually basically admitted that there's really no evidence of this. There's no evidence that this is the problem, right? There are so many other factors, whether it's too much regulation or global insecurities that are changing the prices, or obviously taxes, right? But there's a lot of factors that are leading to why we're paying the highest gas prices. And price gouging, it's really hard to determine if that's actually one of them. And in a lot of cases, from the numbers I've seen, that's actually not what is driving the cost of gas.
It's not the issue. Californians are getting squeezed, and we need to take action on it. And having these hearings where, this one at least was beneficial, right? We kind of shed some light on, hey, everything we did last year where we ran around and got these fancy headlines throughout the state, said this isn't going to happen anymore. Well, that
hasn't
actually
really changed anything.
Hasn't changed anything. Yeah.
Well, and actually, to your point, so Senator Stephen Bradford, who is a Democrat, very well respected in the Senate, it sounds like you're almost quoting him here, because he quoted in the hearing, "We want to have the confidence that the solutions will bring relief to Californians at the pump are real and not just aspirational. Far too often we shoot first and ask questions later," which is pretty much what we did with this.
Yep, absolutely.
In my opinion. So, but it's really good to see that coming from, someone who probably actually voted for that bill. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be wasting time on things that aren't actually going to fix the problem. But yeah, I filled up the other day. It was $100 again. It's been a while since my wife's car is $100.
I was going to say, how'd you fill up your EV for $100?
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
We drive both.
All right, there you go.
But no, I was shocked because I got her gas the other day. It's usually like $80. It's been like $80 lately. I'm like, man, $100. And to your point about affordability, and this is actually also worth noting. In July, our tax goes up again. Our gas tax goes up again. And so, again, every penny here and there, it's creating more hardships for Californians.
Yeah, well, and you look at communities like the one I represent, Inland Empire. You've got long distance commutes. People need to, and they move out there for more affordable housing, right? They want a higher quality of life, and so that's going to increase commute times. And we don't have the ability to just say, okay, we're going to take transit or we're going to use public transportation. That doesn't exist in a lot of communities in California, more rural ones, and so they're left with no other option. There's not even electrical charging infrastructure in place to be able to buy these. So the combustion engine is your only option here, and typically it's for folks who are the most disadvantaged, the most low income Californians. And so the questions that are having to be answered around the dinner table are, well, after I pay rent, fill up the tank, and put food on the table, are we gonna be able to buy the kids soccer jerseys? Are we can we afford that? California should not be having to answer those questions, especially given that we're the 5th largest economy in the world. That's a failure of leadership, and we need to do better. Californians deserve better.
They do, and I think that I think everyone cares about the environment, right? And we all want to see a better environment, better air quality, all those good things. But at the end of the day, you also have to balance that with, what it's going to cost our constituents, what it's going to cost Californians. And we have not done a good job in California of balancing that. We have mandated far too many things rather than incentivize them, right? And we've just gone, we haven't allowed it to happen naturally. We're trying to force certain things before we're really ready to do that, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a speaker back in our district a couple months ago said, if the operation's successful but the patient doesn't survive, was it really worth having the operation? I think sometimes
that's a great way to put it.
We could learn from that a little bit up here in the legislature.
For sure. So speaking of expensive cost increases and some controversial stuff, this week the PUC approved the electricity rate change. So essentially implementing a $24 fixed charge for investor-owned utilities. So these are your non-municipals, your PG&Es, your SDGs, Who's in your district, by the way? Who's like the
Edison's my main.
You have Edison.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So, I mean, I actually don't have any IOUs, and well, we do for natural gas, but not for electricity. So my
Okay.
district's a little different. But for anyone that lives in, one of those investor-owned utility coverage areas, this is a new change. It's going to be everyone should be aware of, at least. A $24 fixed charge on your electricity bill. Now, on the other hand, the proposal also basically says that you need to bring down your per kilowatt charge
Right.
about 5 to 7 cents per kilowatt, kind of to offset the increase in the fixed charge. But obviously, something that's been in the news a lot. A lot of my constituents have expressed concern that this is going to increase costs. It won't actually for my constituents because I don't have any IOUs, but I was curious if you've been hearing from anyone about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way this is. First, I want to talk about how this actually came into law, right?
Yes, that's a good place to
Because
start.
that's where it gets real frustrating for me when we sit there and we stick policy in these budget trailer bills, and nobody knows what they're voting on. They're passing them through, and then you find out a year later, wait, we did what? And we just wholly bypassed the public scrutiny process. And I think that's why this is so shocking to some people. It's not like this went through policy committee. It's not like this was a well-vetted.
It was never debated. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just said, hey, this is happening now. CPUC is coming out with some regs, and let's see what happens with it. That's not the way to make policy.
Right.
The debate on this is interesting, though, right? It's really more coastal versus inland. You're talking about seeing increased savings for high volumetric users. And you can have that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Do we want to be incentivizing people to use less electricity?
Right.
Or do we want to be saying that, on the other hand, well, there's all these hard dollars and infrastructure costs that are being mandated essentially by the legislature, right, to meet all these climate goals that we have. Should coastal communities who don't use as much pay their fair share because this is sort of a fixed charge? I think it's something worthy of debate and discussion. I'm glad that we're actually bringing this out and having that conversation because, again, going through the process that we did last time just isn't the right way to do policy, in my opinion.
I'm glad we're having the conversation. It's just like a year and a half too late.
Yeah.
This is the conversation we should, the actual debate over the policy is what we should have been talking about 2 years ago. So for the listeners, 2021, the legislature passed a budget trailer bill, which is supposed to be about budgetary items. The general rule of thumb is that you should never do policy in a budget bill, but inevitably we always do. The legislature always puts policy changes into these budget trailer bills. And in this case, one of the policies was requiring the PUC, our Public Utilities Commission, to create this new fixed charge on investor-owned utilities. Now, again, there are, I think, depending on where you live and where, there's different sides of that argument. But, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's really frustrating that I think it was this year, a coalition of legislators came out to undo
what they did
a year and a half after they voted to do it.
Absolutely.
Almost like, they were surprised, right? And it's like, well, and part of the reason, to your point, is that it was in a budget bill. But also it's like, we need to be more cognizant of what we're voting on, right? And I still don't know how it got in there in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, we weren't
here yet.
We weren't here, to be fair. So, but yeah, it's really frustrating. So, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I guess people should be aware of it. It also kind of has an impact too on solar customers, right? Because solar customers, they're, and I know that. Do you have solar on your home? Actually,
I don't have solar.
You don't
on
have
my
solar,
home,
okay?
no.
But basically, solar customers are a lot more about the use, saving money by obviously using less energy because you're offsetting with solar.
Well, and the state, through policy, said we want to encourage you to put these rooftop solar panels on your home, and the trade-off you're going to get is you're going to see a significant savings, right? We want you to become early adopters. We want you to be early investors in this technology when, it's not that popular. It's not as accessible, and now it's become more so. And so is it fair to go back to those people and say, hey, thanks for doing that. By the way, let's pull the rug out from under you?
Now we're taking all the... Well, and every time you add a fixed charge, right? If you add a fixed charge, that means that you can't offset it by usage, right? And I think that's the key point that I think a lot of people are frustrated about. And actually, a lot of environmentalists are actually upset about this because it actually somewhat discourages conservation, right?
That's the thing. If you're a high volumetric user,
Right. So
you're
it's
going
like,
to be
well, I'm just
reducing
paying this anyway, so
Right.
my incentive to actually conserve is less. So, but something to be aware of. And definitely, we have a budget conversation coming up, in the next month. So, I mean, keep an eye out for those budget trailer bills. I hope we've learned some lessons from this.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
some of our colleagues have learned some lessons from this. Last story here before we move into our clip of the week. This one I just threw on here because I was just kind of like blown away by it. But essentially, San Francisco came out and mentioned that they have this program. They spent $5 million for a program that basically provides alcohol to about 10 to 20 folks in a kind of a bed housing situation, treatment situation, but they provide alcohol to the person. I don't know if you saw this story. This is why I'm so passionate about transparency over our homelessness dollars, because I don't believe we should be enabling, a condition, essentially an alcohol addiction in this case, that is keeping people in their situation, right? I don't think it helps get them out of their situation.
I mean, when I saw that headline, I immediately texted my staff and I was like, "Is this real?" And
right,
there's definitely two sides to the argument when you're looking at harm reduction policies, and you have people who, maybe in the short term, to kind of get
bring them off of it,
and then get them into these programs where they're actually. Now, I'm not familiar with the specifics of this program, so I don't know that that's necessarily happening either. Which, to your point about transparency, we need to have a little more oversight when you're sitting here looking at this massive budget deficit, and the headline the next day is, "Oh, $5 million is going for alcohol in San Francisco." That's it's gonna it raises some eyebrows, right, and rightfully so.
Yeah, and I think so. In the cases of like a fentanyl addiction, right? I mean, there are some really serious steps you have to take to come down off of that addiction. And so for those, anyone that has struggled with alcoholism, that can also be the case with alcohol. But there are certainly some merits to the idea of, if you are addicted to fentanyl, you can't go cold turkey off of fentanyl, right? You have to have a treatment program that brings you down off of that fentanyl. And I've actually talked to, a mom in my district whose son had become addicted to fentanyl, and it took many, many months to help him, get his life back on track, because you have to start by kicking that addiction, right? And you have to start by actually fixing that, which is not easy to do. But yeah, to your point, I mean, that being said, I think it's also a perception issue. You're spending $5 million on a 20-bed program that, in some ways continues like to provide alcohol to people who need to be focusing on sobriety. I think that is just not something that I think most people are going to want their tax dollars going to, right? So I think that's why the transparency is so important. It's like, and also, I have no idea. We have no idea if this program's even been effective.
Well, that's what's really important. I think you said this again last week in that budget sub hearing. You said, I think we need to stop. I'm paraphrasing, but measuring the efficacy by the amount of dollars we throw at a program rather than the actual results. And so that's something that we definitely need to demand more accountability on, and see those numbers to make sure those dollars are effective. And
my guess is, if you were to put this program up against programs that are getting, people's lives, people sober and things like that, it's probably, there's some better ways to invest our dollars. But all right, let's get into our clip of the week. We don't have to dive too deep. So this is on the state budget. So I'm going to play it real quick, and then we'll talk budget for a minute and then close it out.
Thanks for joining us at noon. I'm Lisa Gonzalez. We're following developing news right now. Governor Newsom just releasing his revised budget plan for the state. He says the state is facing a $27.6 billion shortfall. The budget shortfall smaller than what was anticipated back in January. The governor's original estimate was $38 billion, and the state's legislative office estimated $73 billion in an effort to balance the budget. So the governor's proposing eliminating 10,000 vacant state jobs and suspending some business tax deductions to help balance the budget.
I prefer not to make this cut. These are programs. These are propositions that I've long advanced, many of them. These are things that I've supported. These are things we work closely with the legislature to advance. None of this is kind of work you enjoy doing, but you got to do it. We have to be responsible. We have to be accountable. We have to balance the budget. And so we are submitting today a balanced budget. But we're doing so mindful of the world we're living in. And I remind you every year, as I think previous governors have, the volatility that is the tax system. And yes, you'll ask the same question we get asked every year. Shall we or should we reform the tax system? The answer is yes. How we do that is a more difficult and challenging conversation.
And the legislature must pass a budget bill for the upcoming fiscal year by midnight on June 15th.
So, what do you think? So, how would you solve the budget? I'm kidding. I'm not going to actually ask you that question today. So, the governor actually came out with this a little early. So, he didn't need to announce this until next week, or this week, I guess, the week we're recording this. But he ended up doing it on Friday. And so, just for the listeners, like, we're going to do a deep dive. So Tom Sheehy is going to be coming on next week to talk about the budget, may revise in depth. Mm-hmm. So we don't need to get too in depth, but what were your initial thoughts on the budget announcement?
It's interesting. I'm still sort of stuck at how we are at $27 billion. The governor's now claiming, even though revenue's been worse than he projected originally, and the legislative analyst office is thinking that it's double this. Yeah. It feels like some sort of funny math to me a little bit, and I think these budget gimmicks are not the appropriate way to address the spending problem we have in California. I mean, when you look at the revenues we collect compared to 10 years ago, we're like $100 billion more than we had a decade ago. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of improved or increased services. So I think a lot of it comes back to what you were talking about with homelessness, what you were talking about with transparency. I think we need to sit there and look at some of these expenditures and find out if they're actually doing what they are intended to do or what we claim they're going to do, and revisit those programs. We can't just continue to shovel money into the furnace and then play budget gimmicks and kick the can down the road. It's not the appropriate way to do it. It's not responsible, and it's not fair to the California taxpayer whose money we're entrusted to handle. So I'm disappointed. Obviously, haven't seen a ton of the details on the May revise yet. And again, I always find it funny when they talk about our budget deadline, which is really just, sort of our fake shell budget deadline. And then we continue on with these trailer bills that actually have all the
June 15th is the deadline, but it's never done by June 15th in theory. We just have to meet the constitutional requirement. And, unfortunately, we keep talking about it until the end of August.
But we've been warning about this for years, right? I mean, and not just us, but the Republican caucus has been, sounding the alarm that we're not always going to have these fantastic revenue years, and it's responsible to invest in a rainy day fund. It's responsible to look at, how sustainable and effective these programs are, and it seems to have fallen on deaf ears. So, obviously, we're going to continue to have these conversations, and we'll see what happens come June 15th and through there. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think to your point about the numbers, I think and that was when I first initially heard that. I mean, the reporting was a little off, but it's partially because the governor, the way he framed the budget announcement, I think he wanted that 27 billion number to get picked up.
Right.
But that's not actually accurate. So if you actually look at, the governor's saying 27.6 billion, but that subtracts the early action dollars, which was the 17 billion. So he's trying to paint this picture like, oh, our deficit's only, in fact, I saw this a lot in the media. Our deficit's only 27 something billion. But when you add that to the 17, I think basically it adds up to almost 45 billion. So the LA Times actually, to their credit, got it right in their title. They have 45 billion because they were like, we're not going to take the governor's talking point. We're going to just actually post the real deficit.
Right.
And so his projected deficit has actually grown by like 7 billion since January.
Projected revenue's been down.
So I think like he's very good at this, but he did a very good job of kind of framing it where it's like, oh, we only have to deal with 27 billion more dollars. When the reality is that the deficit is more than he projected in January, closer to $45 billion, and still way off of the legislative analyst's office, who said 73 then. What are they going to say now? 80? I mean, 90? Like, I don't know. I'm really anxiously awaiting the legislative analyst's office report on this announcement, so that, to see like what they say. Like,
no, absolutely. One of the things that he did mention in your clip of the week there was tax reform in California.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right on this. We do have a very volatile revenue system.
Oh, for
We're
sure. Yeah.
heavily dependent on capital gains, and that's something that we've seen as long as I can remember, and that does need to be addressed. Sort of curious if you had any thoughts on that, because if the governor's out there asking for it, I would love to work with him on something.
I just think sure, yeah, I share that, but I mean, like Jerry Brown said this for 8 years. He said this every year for 8 years. Man, our tax system, it's so volatile. We just have too much focus on capital gains, personal income tax, and so when the economy does poorly, our budget does poorly, right? That's all that I feel like that's been being said for a long time, but I don't think there's a real seriousness to actually address that, right?
I mean, maybe we could look at our spending and kind of just follow the curve, and then when we have these, great revenue years, tuck it away in a rainy day fund.
So that's kind of the frustrating thing to me too. It's like we could have done so much more to like save money, right? We had a almost $100 billion surplus 2 years ago.
Yep.
And instead of setting aside more money or even, paying down, other debts or whatever, we spent it all on one-time priorities, which I'm glad they weren't ongoing. But the governor's out there talking about how like, well, the good news is we spend it on one-time things. Well, the problem is we spent it and it's gone, right? And, you've got business owners. I mean, we've got a $20-something billion unemployment insurance, debt that we owe to the federal government that our business owners are going to be paying over the next 10 years probably. We're one of 2 states that still has a debt to the federal government on that. We could have taken $20 billion of that $100 billion and paid off that debt. We didn't do it, and now our business owners are having to do it. So there's just so many things where I'm like, we could have done so much better before we got to this point. And we knew we would get to this point because the economy doesn't stay up forever, right?
Absolutely.
So, frustrating, but. Hey, any final thoughts before we let you go?
I just appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
It's a blast getting to chat with you, and hope to do it again soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely do it again. And always appreciate you coming on. And it was kind of a weird week because we had Kate Sanchez on this last week, but because of some scheduling issues, we did it midweek. So I feel like there were fewer things to discuss since that last episode. But it was really great to get Kate Sanchez on here. I've been trying to get her on the show for a year.
Finally got it done.
Yeah. So I got it. I had to call her personally and be like, hey, be great if you came on. And she finally said yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it actually is a feat. So I don't know if you've seen the Cal Matters digital democracy tool.
I know where you're going with this.
You know
yes,
where I'm
I
going?
have.
She's the least talkative member in the legislature, which I think is why she was hesitant to come on.
Well, you got it done. Good job.
Yeah, so exciting stuff. But next week, we're going to have Tom Sheehy to talk all things budget. He was on earlier this year to talk about the January budget. We're going to have him back on to talk about the May revise. So tune in for that next week. If you have any ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Obviously, listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Watch, subscribe, follow on YouTube, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. And you can follow today's host on Twitter. For myself, at Joshua_Hoover, and then at is it ASM Wallis? Is
That's
that
right.
the best one for you? All right. So follow Greg on X, and we'll see you guys next week. See you later.
All right. See you, Josh. Thanks.